It was supposed to be just another lively debate on The View, until one line stopped everything. The cameras rolled as the familiar sound of audience laughter echoed across the studio. The lights shimmered against the polished desk, Whoopi at the center, effortlessly commanding attention. Her tone was playful, her confidence electric, the veteran host in her domain. Tyrus, sitting across from her, smiled politely, nodding, waiting for his turn. Then it happened. With a casual tilt of her head and a glint in her eyes, Whoopi dropped a line that sliced through the air like a whisper-turned weapon. The audience laughed, assuming it was just another joke. But it wasn't. Something in her voice, mocking, dismissive, hit harder than anyone expected. Tyrus's smile froze, the corners of his mouth stiffening. His eyes flickered with that unmistakable mix of disbelief and restraint, the kind that tells you a line has been crossed. For a moment, the world seemed to slow. The laughter faded into uncertainty, replaced by a collective silence that hung heavy between them. Whoopi leaned back unfazed, her smirk lingering as if daring him to respond. Across the table, Tyrus sat still, too still. His jaw tightened, his gaze locked not in anger, but in controlled fire. The tension pulsed like static electricity, invisible but palpable. Crew members exchanged glances. One camera operator adjusted focus, unsure whether to zoom in or cut away, and then Tyrus blinked once, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't the reaction Whoopi expected. It was the calm before a reckoning. No one in the studio knew it yet. But Tyrus wasn't going to let this moment slide. Behind the smiles, something was cracking, unseen but undeniable. Long before the cameras rolled, the tension was already alive in the air, quiet, unspoken, coiled tight beneath the gloss of daytime television. Producers moved in hushed clusters, their voices low, their eyes darting toward the stage where the morning's discussion was about to unfold. The topic list sat on the table, neat and harmless on paper, but everyone knew it had the potential to ignite fireworks. Whoopi stood near her seat, poised and powerful, laughing with crew members, radiating the self-assurance of someone who owned the room. She had weathered storms before. Nothing on The View rattled her, or so it seemed. Across the stage, Tyrus sat in silence, watching. He wasn't just waiting, he was studying. Every light, every movement, every cue. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, a rhythm of focus more than nerves. This wasn't his world. The chatter, the spin, the cheerful confrontation disguised as conversation. But he was ready. The tension between them wasn't about the day's topic. It was older, deeper. It was about control, about who got to define the narrative, who held the final word. Whoopi represented the establishment, the voice of untouchable authority. Tyrus represented something raw, grounded in lived experience and an unpolished truth that made people uncomfortable. The clash wasn't personal, but it was inevitable. Crew members sensed it without words. The air felt heavier, as if the stage lights themselves could feel the coming storm. When Whoopi glanced over, their eyes met for half a second. Professional, polite, but edged like steel. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked to life, and in that instant, years of frustration and restraint collided in one explosive exchange. Whoopi's laughter could fill a room, but behind it was a challenge that cut deep. From her first day on The View, Whoopi Goldberg had mastered the art of dominance, not through volume, but precision. Her humor wasn't just funny, it was disarming, slicing through arguments before they could form. Politicians, celebrities, even seasoned journalists had sat in that chair and left it smaller than when they arrived. She wielded charm like a blade, swift, graceful, and sharp enough to draw blood without anyone noticing until it was too late. Clips from past moments painted her legacy. A senator who'd stumbled over policy, silenced by a single raised eyebrow. A Hollywood star who cracked under her laughter, mistaking ridicule for warmth. Whoopi knew how to turn tension into applause and controversy into ratings gold. It wasn't malice. It was instinct. Control was her currency, and on this stage, she never spent more than she gained. Today, though, something was different. Tyrus wasn't like the others. He didn't fidget, didn't flinch, didn't chase her approval. He sat there with a kind of stillness that unsettled her, a man grounded in conviction rather than performance. As the conversation warmed up, Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her trademark grin spreading slowly. The topic, accountability, race, and public perception, was familiar territory for her. She had steered 1,000 conversations like this before. But now her tone carried something else, a hint of mockery, a dash of challenge. "So, Tyrus," she began, her words dipped in velvet but carrying an edge. "You talk a lot about speaking your truth, but when your truth doesn't match the facts, what happens then?" The audience laughed, unsure whether to find it funny or uncomfortable. The camera caught Tyrus's subtle inhale, his jaw tightening just enough to be seen by millions. Whoopi pressed on, sensing blood in the water. "You know, we've had plenty of people come on this show saying they've been misunderstood. But maybe, just maybe, it's not misunderstanding. Maybe it's accountability catching up." Laughter again, louder this time. The crowd was following her lead. That was her genius. She didn't just talk, she conducted. Every smirk, every inflection was a note in her performance. But across the table, Tyrus wasn't laughing. His eyes were steady, fixed on her, studying. The more Whoopi spoke, the more her words began to lose rhythm against the silence he gave her in return. Silence that spoke louder than any rebuttal. For the first time that morning, Whoopi's expression flickered. Just slightly, but enough. She leaned in, voice lowering, as if to reassert control. "You've got strong opinions, Tyrus, but strength without humility? That's just noise." The audience clapped, thinking she'd won the moment. But as the applause faded, Tyrus's calm expression began to change. For years he'd stayed composed, but this time, his silence carried fire. Tyrus had learned long ago that noise didn't equal strength. He grew up in places where shouting only drowned out meaning, where calm was the only armor against chaos. In locker rooms, in studios, in the unforgiving circus of television, he'd seen how quick the world was to misread silence as weakness. But for him, silence was strategy. It was focus distilled into patience. Sitting across from Whoopi now, the laughter still echoing, he could feel the familiar hum in his chest, the space between restraint and reaction. His fingers rested against his coffee mug, unmoving, while his mind replayed every subtle jab, every dismissive laugh that had come before. It wasn't just about her words. It was about what they represented, the way people like him, direct, unapologetically grounded, were often reduced to caricatures by the very platforms that claimed to amplify all voices. He remembered his early days, how many times producers had told him to loosen up, be more entertaining, play the role. But he was never here to play. Every struggle had carved into him a deeper sense of self, a code built on respect and honesty. You give what you demand. You listen before you strike, and yet as Whoopi's last words, strength without humility, that's just noise. Hung in the air, something inside him shifted. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, clearer. The realization that humility didn't mean submission, and that respect wasn't owed, it was earned. The studio lights felt hotter now, the air thick with expectation. The audience still chuckled faintly, sensing tension but mistaking it for entertainment. Across the table, Whoopi wore her trademark half-smile, as if she'd already wrapped up the segment in her favor. But Tyrus wasn't playing for applause. He wasn't even playing for the cameras. He thought of the people watching at home, the ones who'd been talked over, laughed at, dismissed for not shouting louder. The quiet ones, the ones who led with dignity and paid the price for it. They were his people, even if they'd never meet him. And this was for them. His heartbeat slowed. His breathing evened out. In that moment, everything sharpened, the lights, the voices, the pulse of silence. It wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. He turned slightly, his gaze cutting through the glare of the studio, landing back on Whoopi. His calm expression hadn't broken, but behind it now was something unmistakable: resolve. For years he had chosen restraint. For years, he had swallowed the easy responses. But today, his silence wasn't surrender. It was a prelude, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't anger. It was clarity sharpened by truth. What started as banter erupted into a verbal battleground. The studio's hum turned sharp, electric. Whoopi leaned forward, voice low but laced with authority, the kind that could turn a conversation into a confrontation. "You talk about respect," she said, smiling tightly. "But isn't that just another way of saying you want people to agree with you?" The audience laughed, uncertain whether to cheer or brace. Tyrus didn't flinch. His voice, calm and grounded, carried through the noise. "No," he said, "it's about listening without assuming you already know who someone is." That line hung heavy. The air shifted. You could feel it in the silence between the claps, in the sudden restraint of an audience unsure which side to take. Whoopi fired back, her rhythm sharp now. "Oh, come on, Tyrus. This isn't about assumptions, it's about facts." He leaned in slightly, eyes steady. "Then maybe the facts deserve a chance to speak before we turn them into punchlines." The laughter that followed wasn't from humor. It was nervous, shaky, like people realizing they were watching something no longer scripted. Each word felt like a stone tossed into still water, the ripples colliding between them. Whoopi's charm began to tighten into frustration. Her tone rose, hands moving as if to reassert control of the room. But Tyrus didn't match her volume. He matched her presence. His pauses were precise, deliberate, commanding more power in silence than most could in a shout. The tension became tangible. Every camera zoomed in, every breath a countdown, and then came the sentence that silenced the entire studio. In one calm sentence, Tyrus flipped the power dynamic and the audience erupted. The moment had been building. The air stretched thin with unspoken tension. Whoopi leaned back, arms crossed, ready to deliver another trademark quip. But Tyrus beat her to it, his voice steady, low, unshakably certain. "Respect," he said, "isn't about agreeing. It's about not mistaking your platform for proof that you're always right." The words landed like a strike of lightning, clean, bright, undeniable. For a heartbeat, there was no laughter, no movement, just silence so thick it hummed. Whoopi's expression faltered, the certainty in her eyes flickering just enough for the cameras to catch it. You could almost hear the gears turning, the instinct to regain control kicking in. But this time, the rhythm had changed. Tyrus wasn't on the defensive anymore. He was holding the room in his palm. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply looked around the table, at Whoopi, the hosts, the blinking red light of the live camera, and said softly, "When people stop listening, the conversation stops being honest." And I think we just reached that point. The audience gasped, a few clapped nervously, but others, many, rose to their feet. You could feel the division in real time, half stunned, half electrified. Even the crew hesitated, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the moment breathe. Whoopi's voice wavered, an attempt at humor that didn't quite land. "Well," she said with a forced laugh, "that's one way to make your point." Tyrus nodded politely. "Sometimes," he replied, "you have to." That was it, the mic drop without theatrics. The composure made it even more powerful. The applause began as a trickle, then grew, rolling through the audience like a wave. The other hosts glanced at each other, eyes wide, sensing history being made on their own set. Tyrus stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and gave a courteous nod to the panel. There was no anger in his movement, only conviction. And as he turned to leave, Whoopi watched him with an expression caught between disbelief and reluctant respect. The camera followed him, the frame tightening on his back as he exited the stage, every step echoing louder than the last. The red light blinked off. The producers exhaled in collective shock, and in that instant, the narrative shifted, not just in the room, but across the country, because while the studio was silent, the world beyond it was about to roar. But as Tyrus stood to leave, the internet began to explode. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Screens lit up across the nation. It started with one tweet, a shaky recording from a fan in the studio. "Tyrus just checked Whoopi live on air." Unreal. The post hit 100,000 views in minutes. Then 1 million. By midnight, the hashtag Tyrus vs Whoopi was trending on 3 continents. TikTok stitched the moment into endless loops, slow-motion replays, captions dissecting every glance, every pause. One creator said, "He didn't just speak, he stood his ground," while another countered, "Whoopi just got ambushed by her own show." Comment sections became battlegrounds. On Instagram, the freeze frame of Tyrus standing to leave became iconic. Jaw set, eyes steady, a modern-day folk hero to some, a provocateur to others. Twitter threads spiraled into think pieces about free speech, power dynamics, and the fine line between conviction and defiance. Celebrities joined the fray. Some defended Whoopi's fire, calling it classic talk show dominance. Others applauded Tyrus for staying calm under pressure. One actor tweeted, "That's what strength looks like, not noise, but control." The post racked up 2 million likes before morning. News outlets scrambled to capitalize. Headlines screamed across the internet. Clash on The View, when debate turned into drama. Political commentators analyzed it like a cultural event, breaking down body language, tone, and even the seconds of silence between sentences. Meanwhile, Tyrus stayed silent. No statements. No follow-up interviews. Just one cryptic post on his social feed. A black screen with the words, "Respect isn't a volume, it's a value." That single sentence sent the internet into a frenzy again. Memes followed, Tyrus dropping microphones, walking through flames, sitting calmly as chaos erupted around him. The story had become more than entertainment. It had become a mirror, reflecting how divided, reactive, and hungry the public had become for authenticity in a world of constant noise. But beneath the digital fireworks, something deeper began to take shape, something that had nothing to do with likes, followers, or viral trends, because beyond the memes, a conversation about dignity and courage was quietly beginning to grow. He didn't just defend himself. He redefined what strength looks like. In an era where outrage is currency, Tyrus did something radical. He refused to play the game. While others shout, he stood still. While others fight to be heard, he let silence do the talking. That moment wasn't weakness. It was mastery. As the world argued online, the real story wasn't about who won. It was about what Tyrus represented. He didn't trade insults or match volume. He chose control over chaos. And in doing so, he reminded millions watching that dignity is the ultimate form of defiance. Clips of his calm expression began circulating with new captions. "This is how you fight without fighting." People started sharing personal stories, of moments they held back when provoked, of times they chose peace over pride. His composure became a symbol for anyone tired of being baited by arrogance and noise. Even critics who disagreed with him couldn't deny it. The man held his ground without losing his soul. In an industry built on sound bites and spectacle, that was revolutionary. He didn't raise his voice, yet somehow it echoed louder than any argument could, because true strength isn't about overpowering someone else. It's about mastering yourself. It's about knowing when to speak, when to stand, and when to walk away with your integrity intact. That's not retreat. That's command. And maybe that's why his silence resonated far beyond a television set. It wasn't just about a TV clash anymore, it was about all of us. About what happens when we choose composure over chaos, principle over performance. Because sometimes, silence isn't surrender, it's supremacy. The cameras stopped, but the message kept echoing. Long after the applause faded and the studio lights dimmed, that moment between Tyrus and Whoopi lingered. Not as just another viral clash, but as something deeper, a reflection of the world we live in. A world that rewards outrage, yet quietly craves authenticity. What happened on The View wasn't about politics or celebrity ego. It was about a line drawn, not in anger, but in integrity. It was a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands its ground and lets truth breathe. Clips will fade. Hashtags will vanish. But what Tyrus embodied will stay. the courage to respond without rage, the grace to hold composure when tested, and the wisdom to know that silence can speak volumes. That's what dignity looks like in real time. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we all need more of. People willing to stand tall, stay calm, and choose respect when provoked. Because the world isn't changed by those who shout the loudest, but by those who refuse to lose themselves in the noise. So as the lights fade and the echo remains, ask yourself, when was the last time you stood for something without saying a word? If this story reminded you that calm is power and respect is rebellion, then share it. Comment below. Join the conversation. Because every time we lift up dignity, we push back against the chaos. Subscribe, share, and stand for respect in a world addicted to noise. Because real strength doesn't need to shout.